my 6. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid, where we're all about homesteading, at least the storytelling part of it. You know, the part there at the end of the day, once all the work is done and they'd sit around the campfire or sit around the wood stove in the house or the fireplace, listen to a storyteller. That's me. I mean, I'm like, that's like a necessary job in homesteading. So stop hating. Was that a growl? You know, I'm doing this from a different angle today. Right here, that's the back of the sign that says, warning, Bigfoot, Sasquatch territory, stay on marked trails. There goes the trail up and around the hill. Got a camera up there, but it's facing the other way. So you are really going to have to get my 6 today to watch to see if anything creeps up behind us through the meadow, down the trail, through the forest. It's still a very windy day, and I'm trying to avoid being under any dead tree limbs or dead trees. So that's why we're doing this from a different angle. But today, as of this recording anyway, is October 5. Yep. This is a story called The Pot That Called the Kettle Black. You may have heard this one before. I think I told it last summer while I was working through some first draft issues with this thing when I wrote it. This book, October Nights Part 2, 31 Tales for the Halloween Season, took 2 years to write. So some of these stories, people have said, hey, haven't you told the story before? Parts of it, or the story in part, while I was working through the kinks. But this was a 2-year endeavor, and now these are the final products. Yeah, I see that. Keep your eyes on it. See if it moves. I don't think that was there a minute ago. So anyway, the majority of these are new, but this is one that we've talked about in bits and pieces. Looks like there might be 2 of them back there, huh? I'll tell you, that veil is getting very thin here as we move closer and closer to Halloween. So anyway, this one is about, you know, I grew up in West by God, Virginia, live over in Virginia now. Wonderful state, but I live in one of the little blue islands in a big sea of red, Charlottesville, Albemarle County. And I don't have any, this isn't about the politics, but my point of saying that is that I live in one of those regions where it's not only perfectly okay, but desired activity, I think, to look down upon and belittle rural white males especially. And there's nothing wrong with that. Throw out all the stereotypical jokes you want, and there's no harm, no foul with that. I would answer why that's done. The question is, yeah, why do people do that, and why is it okay to do it to you guys if you're rural or your country or whatever? If you're from Appalachia, if you're an Appalachian American, no one cares if people make fun of you. And I've had people, when they found out I was from West by God, Virginia, not just in Charlottesville, but on the West Coast and in the Middle East and in Asia, of all places, when they find that out, it's always the same. They throw their head back laughing and tell you every hillbilly joke they knew. There's a story coming up closer to Halloween, about middle of the month, called The Two That Got Away, that actually explains why this is perfectly acceptable in our society, and it's based upon facts. So it's not opinion, it's facts. It has to do more with human nature than anything. But this story today for October 5, The Pot That Called the Kettle Black, it's kind of about that to a degree with a twist. So listen up, Buttercup. Think before you speak and judge not, because you don't want to end up like Nigel in this story, who ends up being the pot that called the kettle black. With no further ado, as my beautiful bride dearly, aka Giggly Girl, would say, let's get into the story. And yeah, I'm looking around for him, her, it, or they. You keep looking back here while I read. There's one thing you need to know if you grow up in West by God, Virginia, and if you intend on leaving the state once you're of age. That is, be prepared to hear every hillbilly joke in the book once you reach your new destination outside of West by God, Virginia, no matter where on earth that destination is. No, seriously. When people find out you're from the mountain state, they'll lay them on thick and with excitement, almost as if they'd just been waiting around for a dumb hillbilly like you or me, being that I'm a native of our mountain mama, to come around just to hear their jokes. Here are a couple, just so you'll know what I'm talking about. Why wasn't Jesus Christ born in West Virginia? You give up? Because they couldn't find 3 wise men and a virgin. Okay, try this one. Did you know that the toothbrush was invented in West Virginia? If it had been invented in any other state, they would have called it the teeth brush. And then, of course, there are all the jokes about incest and inbreeding, which truly are not funny in any way, shape, or form, and which we will not go into here and now, but which do lie at the center of importance for this story. You see, this isn't so much my story as it is the story of an old college buddy of mine who we'll call Steve. It's a common name, so the names of the guilty will remain hidden. And it's not even so much Steve's story as it is the story of a couple of Steve's former employers. Steve and I met during our last year at the small state college we attended together in West by God, Virginia. I wish we'd have met earlier because we seemed to be two peas in a pod. Both of us were majoring in nothing. That's right, nothing. Steve and I got what's called Board of Regents degrees, which meant that we'd completed at least 120 credit hours, the magical number to gain a bachelor's, but we never declared a major. We were among the most well-rounded and unemployable of the newly college-educated market upon graduation. Not to worry, however, as we were also among the most quick-witted. Whenever I applied for a job after college, I'd always get an interview, and when that question about my degree came up, no one ever knew what it was, my degree, I would always say, and honestly, I went to college for an education, not a job. That's why I'm here to see you today. As ambivalent as this statement was, it worked as well as any other seemingly random ambivalent statement, and I was always given the offer. Steve had grown up on a farm in West by God, Virginia, and though he knew everything there was to know about agriculture and horticulture, he didn't want to have to rely on farming as a livelihood. He'd seen too many bad years when his family had worked so hard just to have their crops ruined by weather or seemingly uncontrollable pests. Steve had decided he was going to do what he knew and what he loved after college, just on a different scale. Steve had spent a summer in New Jersey while in his teens. I can't remember if it was with a church group or what, but what I do remember is that it was an eye-opener for him. For the first time in his life, having come from West by God, and having always seen quite the opposite, Steve, while in New Jersey, found himself surrounded by wealth. Affluent people who often seemed like they had more money than they had sense. I could be the groundskeeper for some trust baby, he'd told me excitedly during one of our astronomy labs one beautiful October night back in the late 1990s. We'd taken astronomy to fit the requirements for our last science credit. We had lab every Tuesday and Thursday nights at 8 p.m. until 10 p.m. It was the fall semester, so it was plenty dark by then, and not too terribly cold. Steve would always come to my apartment after his last class, which let out around dinner time on the days before the labs, and we would eat and drink and be merry, and usually show up for the lab shit-faced. After only the first couple of weeks, we were joined during our pre-lab meals and bouts of binge drinking by half the class. The female half. Man, all I'd have to do is what I love, Steve told me. Take care of the lawn, tend to the gardens, both vegetables and flowers, and take care of any pet livestock projects they have. That was Steve's plan, and I'm happy to say that when I ran into him about 5 years after we'd graduated, when we'd both gone back, sadly, for the funeral of one of our classmates, I found that he'd made his dream come true. He'd gotten a job working for a childless married couple of about 40 years old. He said that both the man and the woman had come from Fortune 400 company families, trust babies on both sides. They had money coming out their ears. At the time, I was a stockbroker in Charlottesville, Virginia, and Steve, proving he'd been right, was literally making twice as much money as I was at the time doing what he loved, while I'd still not quite figured that love part. I hadn't quite figured out that love part yet. What it boiled down to was that I didn't really like being a stockbroker. But by God's grace, I finally got out of that nonsense business, and well, here I am today doing what I love. Writing, telling stories, and actually supporting my family in so doing, so I guess I finally caught up with Steve in that regard. However, it was just recently when I ran into Steve again, who it appears had gotten tired of those northeastern winters and had recently moved south to the great state of Virginia himself, that our story truly begins, and it is a story that I will now relate. I'm a bit parched. You'll have to excuse me for a second. Like myself, when I first came to Virginia, Steve was subjected to every hillbilly joke imaginable when he first moved to New Jersey. He said that he really liked his employers, but that the man he worked for, who we will call Nigel, for that name seems quite fitting for a northern blue-blooded trust baby type, was continuously giving him hell about all those ignorant inbreds back in West by God. "I can't believe you're actually from West Virginia," Nigel would say upon running into Steve out and about on his vast estate. He could have at least been respectable enough to put the by God part in there, but, well, I guess that's a West Virginia thing, and you've got to be from there to understand it. A West by God Virginia thing, that is. "You don't even talk funny," Nigel would then go on to say before strolling off and doing whatever it is rich trust babies do while they walk around their vast estates doing nothing. Nigel, however, it turned out, had a hobby: horse racing. He raised thoroughbreds on the side of cashing trust fund checks, and basically he spent most of his time with his horses. Between his trust and that of his wife, Nigel nor his wife ever had to work. No one in the family had had to work for generations, and barring a repeat of the 1980s junk bond market fraud, no one would have to work for many more generations, as in all of them, to come, should this childless couple procreate in the future. Nigel spent a lot of time on the road with his horse endeavors, and oddly, his wife, who we'll call Sarah Beth, because a woman of such wonderful blue blood trust baby breeding must have at least 2 first names, no, not just one, never went on the road with him. "Something's different about this trip," Sarah Beth said to Steve when Nigel had taken a trip to Kentucky for the Kentucky Derby during Steve's last year working for the couple, around the time just before he'd moved south to avoid those terrible winters. "I don't know what it is," Sarah Beth had told Steve, "but it's just different. I have a very foreboding feeling about it." By this time, Steve had known that Nigel and Sarah Beth were not close. He told me they'd slept in different bedrooms the entire time he'd worked for them. He said if he didn't know any better, he would have guessed they were brother and sister, not man and wife. How funny would that be, he'd often think to himself. Here Nigel is, always making fun of us dumb hillbillies for being ignorant inbreds, but just think if he was married to his sister. Steve would laugh this idea out of his mind as quickly as it would come into it when it did, but what would soon unfold was no laughing matter. You see, when Nigel returned from Kentucky about a week later, he brought with him the most beautiful young lady that Steve says to this day he's ever seen. And she was pregnant. "Oh my God," Sarah Beth said when Nigel and his young, beautiful, pregnant companion walked into the New Jersey manse. "How did you find her?" "Fate," Nigel said. "It was simply meant to be." "And you're pregnant?" Sarah Beth said, rushing to the young lady and then dropping to her knees and feeling the baby bump on her torso. "This is absolutely wonderful." Steve was in an adjacent room, having come in to use the bathroom, and he was observing these events just before making his way out of the house. "I don't think you understand the enormity of the situation," Nigel said, grabbing Sarah Beth by an elbow and helping her stand. He was convinced the woman had gone into shock and that she was losing her mind. "I'm leaving you, Sarah Beth," Nigel said. "Stacy and I," you see, his young mistress, Stacy, had been raised among the working class and therefore worthy of only one first name, "are in love, and we are with child. And I am leaving you for her, and well, that's all there is to it." "Nigel!" Sarah Beth began screaming. "What have you done? What have you done?" Sarah Beth began pummeling Nigel and clawing at his neck. Nigel threw her off and grabbed the young, beautiful, and very pregnant Stacy by the hand, and they fled the large New Jersey manse. Having made it halfway across the lawn, they stopped immediately when they heard the single shot of a gun. They turned and ran back into the house as quickly as they had fled it. Steve had never left, and what he'd attempted to do was intervene when Sarah Beth had rushed to an end table in the living room and pulled out a pistol and stuck it in her mouth. Steve could not reach her in time, and with a single shot, Sarah Beth extinguished the light of her life forever. "Oh, shit," Nigel said, appearing on the scene. "I didn't do this," he exclaimed, looking over at Steve. "Of course not," Steve said. "I saw the whole thing. She did it herself, and I couldn't stop her in time." "Tell the police," Nigel said. "We're out of here." And with that, Nigel took his sweet, young, pregnant thing and left, and neither of them were ever seen again. And yes, I heard that very loud tree knock. Continue to get my 6. Steve worked out the rest of the year at the old New Jersey estate. He finally left when the estate was sold to a new family who already had a gardener, a dumb hillbilly, it turned out, from Southwest Virginia, who on a regular basis was told by his employers that though his part of Virginia might be part of Appalachia, at least it wasn't part of West Bygod, Virginia, so that was okay. It's the story behind the story that Steve relayed to me that makes this story hideous and terrifying and completely worthy of being included in this collection of creepy stories. For the backstory is this. Nigel and Sarah Beth, it seems, had begun dating as teenagers, and in their 17th years of age, found themselves with child. Both families would have nothing to do with this because, mind you, their names were important. Why, you could walk into your kitchen right now and find several items with the family name of Sarah Beth's family on the labels, and you could do the same with Nigel's family's family name if you were to walk into your garage and have a look around at some of your power tools. In a word, this baby would bring shame to both families, and it might even affect their stock share prices, at least according to their overbearing and controlling parents at the time. So only one thing could be done. Sarah Beth was taken on vacation to the south of France, and when she returned several months later, she had one hell of a tan, spoke broken French, and was no longer pregnant. The family had given the baby, a girl, away, but Sarah Beth had paid a private investigator to keep track of the baby, as she knew she'd want to reconnect with the baby someday when the time was right. If that time never came, however, because it was always possible the baby girl might end up having such a nice life that it would be more damaging should Sarah Beth just show up someday and tell her the truth of her existence. But even if this were the case, Sarah Beth had at least wanted to know that the child was having a good life. It turned out that the child did have a good life. She was cared for by a couple who'd wanted to have children but could not. This couple, who lived in Kentucky, cared for horses, and as such, their child, Stacy, would grow up caring for horses as well. The family ran a stable where many wealthy horse owners would stable their thoroughbreds for a month or so before the big race in Lexington. Shortly after Stacy's 18th birthday, she met a good-looking rich man who looked good for his age of nearly 40 from New Jersey, who'd come to stable one of his horses at her family's stables. Stacy and this man, Nigel, felt some sort of natural connection that neither of them could explain. It was unreal, and in a short time, the two were lovers. Stacy's pregnancy was never planned, but once it happened, Nigel felt that it had been fate. There was some reason the universe meant for this beautiful young woman to be in his life, and he decided that he was going to take her home with him to New Jersey and let Sarah Beth know that the two of them were running off together. Nigel had created an artificial identity and siphoned off a few million from his trust funds into this fake individual's account. He and Stacy certainly would not be as wealthy as Nigel had been accustomed to being, but they certainly would have enough to live happily ever after, and that's exactly what they did after fleeing from the highly valuable New Jersey manse where Sarah Beth had made the choice to take her own life after seeing what Nigel had done. To this day, Steve tells me, neither Nigel nor Stacy know anything about any of this, and he also says that a little birdie has informed him that they've welcomed 2 more children into the world. The end. Hillbilly author, that's me, Hillbilly author's postscript. Who's the ignorant inbred now, Nigel? October Nights, Part 2. 31 more tales for the Halloween season is available with an autograph from our Etsy store. The link is in the description box below. It's available in print and or Kindle from Amazon. And if you can't afford to buy the book or you just don't want to, come back here to this channel every night for the month of October and hear another tale. And if you missed the stories from October Nights Part 1, because obviously Nigel, I might be a dumb hillbilly, but I'm not stupid. There had to be a Part 1 for there to be a Part 2. There's a playlist for that on our channel as well. Go watch those videos if you missed them. They're a hoot. See you for more next time.